بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Welcome back everyone to another lecture. We make our way towards the end of this unit. Today inshallah we will talk about, maybe a little bit of a dry subject, but we will talk about the actual animals that suffice for the sacrificing of the udhiyah. And in this discussion, we will be reminded that we were visited with these terms and these types of animals in the section of zakah. So when we talked about the zakah of livestock, we were introduced to these terms of the different types of sheep and goat and camels, etc. And this is another opportunity to show the internal consistency and cohesion of the Islamic legal tradition. And then we will learn that some larger animals could suffice for multiple families, whereas smaller animals suffice for one family. Then we will also learn what makes it's a sunnah, mu'akkada, we said, a confirmed sunnah, but what could make it obligatory. There's a little bit of a legal, it's a minor point, but because we have some time, I'll mention it. And then we will move from there to talk about the animals, the defective animals that will be excluded from the animals being fulfilling the sunnah act of the sacrificial animal. Of course, any type of harm or any type of illness or any type of major defect, major is the key here, major defect renders the animal not sufficient for the sacrifice. Minor defects, we will learn, will be an exclusion, because animals, just like people, get beat up and have bruises and have different type of ailments like any type of other creature. So that doesn't necessarily, just the existence of something doesn't negate the usefulness of the animal or the sufficiency of the animal for the sacrifice. But here we're talking about major and obvious defects. And then we will learn about some of the auxiliary aspects of the animal, like if it doesn't have a horn, or if it's castrated, if it doesn't have an ear, or if it doesn't have a tail, because these are commonly found in the animals. And then lastly, we will take the section on the time. When is the duration of the time that is the sunnah for the udhiyah in the Eid al-Adha, which we alluded to before. We'll pick it up. So it's a little bit dry, but these are the major topics, inshallah, for today's lecture. All right, let us begin the way we normally begin, to turn to the original text of the matn of Abi Shuja' radiallahu anhu. قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين. فصل في الأضحية. والأضحية سنة مؤكدة، ويجزئ فيها الجذع من الضأن، والثني من المعز، والثني من الإبل، والثني من البقر، وتجزئ البدنة عن 7، والبقرة عن 7، والشاة عن 1. وأربع لا تجزئ في الضحايا: العوراء البين عورها، والعرجان البين عرجها، والعرجاء البين عرجها، والمريضة البين مرضها، والعجفاء التي ذهب مخها من الهزال. ويجزئ الخصي والمكسور القرن، ولا تجزئ المقطوعة الأذن والذنب. ووقت الذبح من وقت صلاة العيد إلى غروب الشمس من آخر أيام التشريق. So he says, Rahimahullah, Qadi Abu Shuja', may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him. May we benefit from his knowledge in this world and in the next. Offering the animal sacrifice is an emphasized sunnah mu'akkada. The following suffices for the sacrifice. The first is a 1-year-old male sheep. Number 2, a 2-year-old male goat. Number 3, a 5-year-old camel. And then 4, a 2-year-old cow. 1 adult camel suffices for 7 individual sacrifices. 1 adult cow suffices for 7. And 1 female sheep suffices for an individual. Defective animals. The following defects render the animal insufficient as a sacrifice: when the animal has, number 1, obvious blindness. Number 2 is obviously lame. Number 3 is obviously sick. Or 4 is so sick that it is senseless. An animal that is castrated or has been has broken horn suffices. An animal whose ear or tail has been cut does not suffice. The time for the sacrifice begins at the time of the Eid prayer and extends until sunset on the third day after Eid al-Adha. Okay, let's look at the Adillah. A lot of this is just taken, prima facie, lifted from the Hadith Adillah. The things that are, sorry. As far as the list of the animals that are sufficient, the first one, this comes in a hadith narrated by Ahmad and al-Tabarani, on Karz al-Khuza'iyya. I want to get the translation out so I have it in front of me with you guys. About the 1-year-old male sheep. Unfortunately, this is one of those things where I have to look it up. The names in Arabic and the names of English are the connect doesn't happen in my mind. Al-Jadha, the Prophet ﷺ sacrificed with the Jadha. The second one listed, or the cow, the fourth one, or sorry, number 2, 3, and 4 comes from the hadith in Muslim narrated by Jabir. Or that hadith, sorry, by Jabir in Muslim is that the Prophet ﷺ sacrificed the camel for 7 people and the cow for 7. And then, as far as the exclusion animals, this comes directly from the text of a hadith of Abu Dawood, narrated by Al-Barra ibn Azib, that the Prophet ﷺ said, forbade, and then he listed the 4 things that we're about to talk about in the class. And as far as the castrated or the broken horn, that is in Hakim's Mustadrak on the authority of Aisha radiallahu anha and Abi Hurairah. Actually, that's hadith says the opposite. Okay, well, I apologize. That piece of dalil, let me pick it up when I come to the section in the Hashiyah. Sometimes the dalil book, it flows. Sometimes it's a little disjointed. This is one of those examples where it's just a little disjointed. I mean, the way the text is prepared in this particular, not that the book is excellent. Okay, so let's just take a step back to say that it's a sunnah mu'akkada. We have the time, so we can take the time. And as I said yesterday in yesterday's class, that the Prophet ﷺ, it was a fard for him, and this is one of his khasa'is, this is one of his special traits. And Imam As-Suyuti, as everyone knows, has al-khasa'is al-kubra and al-khasa'is al-sughra. He has the larger book of khasa'is and the smaller book of khasa'is that catalog all of the special things that only are for the Prophet ﷺ. This would be one of those things. And it's the habit of the ulama, particularly the ulama that lean towards the hadith, but not necessarily, that they like to compile these type of things. I mean, I think in yesterday's class we talked about the word lion and how the word lion has a gazillion names in the Arabic language. Was it yesterday's class? Maybe it was not. It was in this unit for sure. And I talked about the book by Al-Fayruz Abadi that talked about that. Yeah, it was in yesterday's class. We talked about Al-Asad and Al-Usama being an Asad, etc. So linguists do that. A lot of the hadith people do that. So I'm interested in that. That's the way I was taught. So I always try to highlight those things for you. So this is a sunnah mu'akkada for us, but it was a fard for the Prophet alayhi salatu salam. Now when does the sunnah become a fard? When you make a nadhr, when you make a vow that you're going to do it. So if a man or a woman were to say, this udhiyah, and just says the word udhiyah, then at that moment it becomes an obligation that they have to carry it out. And that's one of those tricks that we kind of learn in Islamic law that the nadhr, the vowing of something, can take that which is permissible and then makes it obligatory. So that's just one of those themes, that anything that's permissible, if somebody made a vow to do it, then it becomes personally obligatory, and if they don't carry it out, then they have to do the kafara, etc. I mentioned it because it's in the book, but it's not necessarily pertinent 100% to the legal discussion at hand. Okay, now because of the udhiyah, it's such a big deal. We want to know what are the animals that we can use to sacrifice. What fulfills this obligation? And he mentions the four in the text. Now, all of these are going to be backed by different hadith. I'm not going to mention all of the hadith because there's so many of them, but this is one of those acts, because the Prophet ﷺ did it and it was obligatory. You will find a lot of the hadith and instruction about what kind of animals to sacrifice and what animals don't sacrifice. So like the first one, I said I'm not going to do it, but I guess I am. So the first one, a 1-year-old male sheep. This comes in a hadith of Ahmed. Dahu bil-jad'i min ad-da'ni fi innahu jaiz. Sacrifice with a jad'a, which is the 1-year-old sheep, 1-year-old male sheep, because it is permissible, right? I mean, so there you go. That's from narrated in Ahmed, in the Musnad of Ahmed, on the authority of Bilal radiallahu anhu. Okay, 1-year-old sheep. And then the second one, a 2-year-old male goat, وَالثَّنِيَّةُ مِنَ الْمَعْ. A thaniya, the 2-year-old. So the first one was 1 year old. This is a 2-year-old goat. Where's the dalil for this one? In the hadith of Muslim. Yeah, so this comes in the hadith of Muslim, for example. So again, on the authority of Sayyidina Jabir ibn Abdullah. I see that I'm running out of time. Allow me to pause here, and we'll pick up the discussion in the next clip, inshallah. Okay, so we were just talking about number 2, the 2-year-old male goat. This comes from the hadith of Muslim, narrated by Jabir, on the authority of Jabir. لا تذبحوا إلا مسنة. Do not sacrifice except that which has age, and that's understood as amongst them to be the 2-year-old goat in the in the interpretation of the hadith. And then a 5-year-old male camel. Afwan, a 5-year-old camel. الثانية من الإبل. Well, it would be the same hadith that we just read prior in the Dalil book. Okay, so a 1-year-old male sheep, 2-year-old male goat, 5-year-old camel, and a 2-year-old goat. All of these come directly from the various texts in the hadith, and I mean, there's just there's not much more to say about it, I think, than that. Now, usually 1 animal per family you sacrifice, and then you kind of give out and you distribute. But 1 adult camel suffices for 7 individual sacrifices. If 8 families join in, then the sacrifice doesn't count for any of them. So this is one of those rules where if the 7 families come together and do the camel, and then that would suffice, because the meat is just that much larger. And camel was used by the Prophet ﷺ in one of the battles. I can't remember the battle right now off the top of my head, but to estimate the number of Quraysh. So when he was told how many camels they sacrificed and how many fires they lit, then he right away almost instantaneously he was able to deduce how many people, because it's known at that time that a camel feeds X number of people. So a camel is a large type of a huge animal that has a lot of meat. So I mean, it's going to feed many people. So here, one of the one of the things that's happening in the background of the fiqh is a consideration of the amount of meat. When we come to talk about the defects momentarily, we will see that a lot of the defects have to do with reducing the amount of the edible amount of the animal, or anything that can affect the amount of meat that the animal will yield after it is sacrificed. So in this case, the camel sacrifices for 7, as does a cow. I mean, cow is a massive amount of meat. So for 7, it counts for 7 individual sacrifices. It's also permissible to sacrifice and to add others in your sacrifice by way of reward. That's also permissible. The Prophet ﷺ, when he sacrificed, as is narrated in Muslim, he said, Allahumma taqabbal min Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa min ummati Muhammad ﷺ. Allah accept from the Prophet himself and from the family of the Prophet and the whole ummah of Sayyidina Muhammad ﷺ. So he himself did that. So it's a common practice that you are doing this udhiyah, obviously lillah, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but you want the reward to be spread. And this is where, when we talked about the tasmiyah before, a couple of lectures ago, when we entered into this chapter in Islamic law, and we talked about it's impermissible to say Bismillah and to add something else. It can only be Bismillah. Now you know why, because it's common practice that there would be an association in the act of the sacrifice for the reward for other people. So a couple of steps down from that way of thinking would be like, I'm going to sacrifice this for the saint. And that's popular tasawwuf. So that's not appropriate. That's not, for us that are trying to learn the deen and the Quran and the Sunnah, that's not how we would do it. But when a common person who hasn't had the training or the studying, they do that, we understand where they're coming from. It's not that they're committing an act of shirk, but they want the reward to go to the saint. And that's why the ulama, doing amr bil ma'ruf and nahy anil munkar requires a whole host of prerequisites. The most important of the requisites is to know if it actually is right or it is wrong. And in this issue, this is one of those areas where the fuqaha, they understand. I mean, the person's obviously, no one's worshipping the saint. It's really never happened in the history of Islam. But we say it's not proper adab. That's not how you would do it. There's a better way of doing it and saying it. Anyway, so this comes from this one little issue of law, that it is permissible to bring other people into the sacrifice by way of reward. Like, I want the reward of this to be for my family and my loved ones and my grandparents, etc. You can't sacrifice on behalf of somebody else unless they give you permission to do that. Okay. And then, this is not in the text, but so let me just finish what's written in the text. So one adult camel suffices for 7 individual sacrifices. One adult cow suffices for 7, and a female sheep suffices for an individual. Now you see that there are sheep, goat, camels, and cows. 4 different types of animals. And believe it or not, the fuqaha debated which ones is the best and which one is the order. Now, other than the fact that it's kind of a comical section, which is, it is funny the way that they argue about this. The upshot, and my kind of deduction from this, I think he does actually say this somewhere, is that the thing that the animal that's going to produce the most meat, that's going to be the best thing. Because some people will argue goat meat is better than sheep, or goat meat is better than cow, or the camel is juicier. I mean, I'm not a connoisseur of meats, so I can't opine on what that means. But one of the things that's important is that the animal yields enough meat to feed people. That's the point of the sacrifice. And when we come to talk about the defects, as I said momentarily, one of the things that it's going to be abundantly clear, is that you don't want to come with a messed up animal. You want to come with the best animal possible, the best animal that you can procure in your budget, even if it's a smaller animal, but it's a nice animal and has all of its proper pieces and components, because this is being sacrificed to feed people in the name of Allah, fi sabilillah jalla wa ala. Yeah, so he says, وَأَجْمَعُوا عَلَى اسْتِحْبَابِ السَّمِينِ فِي الْأُضْحِيَةِ. So the fuqaha are in agreement, it's a point of agreement, that it's best to find that which is the fattest, the meatiest animal, a samin, not a thin one, but a meaty animal. So that's the upshot. So that's why I was laughing, because I mean, whether this meat is juicier than this meat, or this meat, this sacrifice produces more blood than this sacrifice, I mean, I'm going to take the muhashi's word for it. But what's important is that if the best animal that has the most meat is the one we want to go with, from the point of view of order. So if you have the ability to take this order, you want to procure the animal that you think will produce the most meat. They also talk about which colors are better. So he'll said the white animal, then the yellow animal, then the red animal, then the black animal, things like that. And I mean, there's no necessarily reason behind that other than, or dalil behind that other. He does mention a tradition from Ahmed radiallahu anhu in the Musnad. Yeah. Okay. And then the next section is the animals that are to be excluded from the defects. So as I said in the beginning of the conversation, that animals are like us. I mean, they have injuries, and some of them are born with defects, and the like. The important thing is, he says, الضابط الجامع لجميع ما ذكر. All of the main issue in all of the type of defects that he's going to mention is any type of defect that reduces the amount of meat and other parts of the animal. So if the animal is sick, you can't use it. So there's zero meat. If the animal is diseased, you can't use it. If the animal has, as we will see, something cut off from it, that's an essential part of the animal. So what is essential versus not essential, we'll get to momentarily. All of these things impact the amount of meat, and therefore that would take them off the list of what we can sacrifice. We'll pick this up in the next and final clip, inshallah. Okay, so we're into the section on the defects, and I said, as the Muhashi says, rahimahullah, that the main thing, the main dabit, the main point of the defects, the rhyme and reason, the legal philosophy behind all of this is anything that reduces the amount of meat on the animal, because as we just said, when we're choosing the priority of the type of animals, we want to choose the biggest animal, the fattest animal we can find, because it's going to produce the most meat for the people that need it the most. Now, you can't sacrifice an animal that has one of these defects, except if you take the defected animal and say, لله علي أن أضحي هذه. I owe Allah this oath that I will sacrifice this animal, this specific one. In that case, you can. But if we're just, usually we wouldn't say that. Usually we would procure the animal and then sacrifice, or have someone sacrifice it for it. So that minor point aside, all of these things that we're going to talk about exclude the animal from being considered a sacrificial animal. So the following defects render the animal insufficient as a sacrifice. Has obvious blindness. Sometimes in the books of fiqh, they'll say there's like a white, kind of cloudy cover on the eye, and it's something that's observable. I've seen pictures of that before. I don't know if that always means that a blind animal will have that whiteness, but it's certainly described like that. But obvious is the case. So You don't have to take the animal to the ophthalmologist and, like you do, oh, you need reading glasses, you need +2 or -1. It's not. So anything that's minor from the things that he's going to list are okay, are forgiven. Here it's obvious. Like you can see, you can tell that this animal is blind. It keeps banging its head. It keeps doing something. It can't walk straight, etc. And then maybe it's obvious from the sense that there's that white cover on their eyes. I wanted to see, does he say something about if it's one or both eyes? Um, uh, okay. Well, I'm not going to dig into that right now. I don't want to take up more of the time. Number two, it's obviously lame. It can't walk straight. It keeps falling. It has a broken leg. It's missing a foot. I mean, whatever the case may be, it's obvious is the case. And he says, even if it becomes lame, while you are holding it to sacrifice, and it becomes lame because you're holding it incorrectly, that would also render it not usable, not sacrificable. Is obviously sick. Now, there's a whole subspecialty or a specialty for this called veterinarians. The veterinarian doctor, a veterinarian is a doctor of animals, and it's one of the most difficult fields of medicine because if you're a human doctor, it's just the same. The human body is the human body, male, female, all races. But if you're a veterinarian, there are different animals, different species that have different insides. So it's kind of like having to know all of those things. Anyway, those people know and can tell. And if if you've ever interacted with a good veterinarian, and I have minimal experience, but a little bit, wow, they're like right away they can tell you, oh, this animal has, and he needs this shot or that. It's quite phenomenal, actually. Obviously sick. The animal's throwing up. It's like sitting like that, and then all of a sudden it just starts shaking, and then like it falls over. I've seen all these different types of things with animals. That's obviously a problem. That means the animal's not normal. That's not what a goat usually does, unless it's a fainting goat, which that's sort of what they do. That's another funny thing. The fainting goats are pretty hilarious. Anyway, is obviously sick or is sick, so sick that it is senseless. It's basically crazy. It's basically majnoon. التي ذهب مخها, the one whose mind is gone. So it's called al-ajfa. So that also exists, that you can see that the animal it's not lame, it's crazy. The animal is crazy. Now, anything of these things that's obvious for people that are new to, even the people that are new to the animals, within reason. Obviously, if you're new to the animal, then you might think everything is odd, but you have to have some background experience. Anyway, that's obvious sickness is going to make the animal not usable for the sacrifice. However, if there's a little bit of these type of things, there's a little limp, there's a little, it stepped on a pebble and it just, those are little type of defects. That's like if you get like a cut or a bruise, that's okay. Take an aspirin, suck it up and go to work, like they kind of say in America. And then an animal that is castrated or has broken horns suffice. The castration is because the Prophet ﷺ sacrificed an animal, I believe that it was castrated. Let me get that hadith for you. Again, every time I prepare, I have the hadith, and then I even underline. Oh, here it is. The Prophet ﷺ ضحى بكبشين موجئين أي خصين. So the Prophet ﷺ sacrificed 2 animals that were castrated, and this is in Ibn Majah and Al-Bayhaqi on the authority of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. So this is for the dalil. Again, the Prophet ﷺ did that. So because the castrated part is not something that you're going to eat, so it's excluded. Same thing with the horn. If the horn is broken or the animal is born without horns, it's okay because the horn is like an exterior part. It doesn't render the animal useless or something like that. However, if the animal does not have an ear or tail, has been cut, it does not suffice the animal, even if they were born without that. So these are considered essential parts of the animal. Afwan. If the animal is born without an ear, you can't sacrifice it. If the animal is born without a tail, you can sacrifice it. But if the animal's tail was cut, you can't sacrifice it. That's what I wanted to say. So let me take them one by one. First is the ear. The ear is considered, obviously, I hope we would all agree, an essential part of the animal. Because he says because it would indicate that something of what can be eaten is not there. The ear and what is attached to the ear. Um, okay. If the ear is injured, that's okay. But if the ear is not there, it's not a problem. As for the tail, if the animal is born without a tail, you can still sacrifice it. But if the tail is cut off for the same types of reason, it's considered not sacrificable, and it's taken off the board. Okay, and then that's just the last part, and we can wrap this up. Time. He says the time for the sacrifice begins at the time of Eid prayer and extends until the sunset of the third day of the Eid al-Adha. So the Eid prayer for us begins a couple of minutes after the shuruq, after the sun rises. We wait for the disk of the sun to rise because there's no prayer during that time. We talked about that in the prayer section. And then you wait for like a spear's length, like 15 minutes. Then you have the Eid prayer. So then after those 15 minutes, the sunnah of waiting this like 10, 15 minutes after the sunrise, and leaving enough time for 2 units of prayers to be prayed, which is the Eid prayer, and enough time for a medium-sized khutbah, 15, let's say 10 to 15 minutes, then that's when you would begin the time for the sacrifice, because the sacrifice is not going to be done until after the Eid prayer. The Prophet ﷺ did the Eid prayer, prayed the khutbah, and then went and sacrificed. So from the beginning of the Eid prayer, which is the 10th of Dhul Hijjah, until the last day of the Tashriq, the days of Tashriq are 11, 12, and 13. And 13 would end with right before Maghrib prayer, because once there's Maghrib on the 13th of Dhul Hijjah, we've entered into the eve of the 14th, the following day. It's the same days that we do the takbirat. So this is the time that we do the udhiyah, inshallah, and it's a sunnah and important that we revive the sunnah. Now what's left is going to be the recommended acts, which we'll talk about in tomorrow's lecture, and some of the other type of slaughterings. We have 2 more lectures, and then so the recommended acts, and then also the next thing is the last thing is the aqiqah, which is a sacrifice for the newborn. And as I mentioned to you, there's more than the aqiqah. There are other types. If you have like a new home or a new office, if you accomplish something like finishing the Quran or finishing a book of fiqh or finishing the recitation of Bukhari or something like that, there are sacrifices that take place of that. Hopefully we'll get a chance to mention them since we have a little bit of extra time. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa maulana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillah, in today's class we took basically the chunk dealing with the udhiyah, looking at beginning that it is a confirmed sunnah. We talked a little bit about that, even though we mentioned it in the previous lecture. And then we talked about it being an obligation for the Prophet ﷺ, despite it being a sunnah for us, confirmed sunnah. And then we looked at the list of the animals that we can sacrifice, and that all of these, the 4 that are listed, come from the text of the Quran, and then the camel and the cow sufficing for 7 sacrifices, 7 families. That also comes, I meant the text of the hadith, sorry. It also comes from the text of the hadith. And then we looked at defective animals. And the main thing about the defect is, number 1, anything that reduces the amount of meat. With the sacrificial animals, we also learned that the best animals, if you have an option, is the animal that's going to produce the most meat when sacrificed, because that's the goal, is to feed people. Then when it comes from defective animals, we said any defect that would affect negatively the amount of meat produced is going to take the animal out of consideration. Number 2 is that the defects that are listed in the fiqh is obvious. There might be some defects that are just not so obvious, or they're a little bit, that's okay. But obvious blindness, obvious lameness, obvious sickness, an obvious, kind of insanity or it's senseless, those take the animal outside of consideration. Then we said that an animal that is castrated or has broken horns would suffice because those do not impact the type of meat that's being eaten. But an animal whose ear or tail has been cut does not suffice. And then the last section that we talked about was the timing when the sacrifice takes place after Salatul Eid on the day of Eid all the way until before Maghrib on the third day of the day of Tashriq, which is the 13th of Dhul Hijjah. Those are the main topics that we talked about, and I tried my best to bring out some of the finer nuances of the fiqh, since we in these last few lectures I actually don't have that much more material to present to you, so maybe I can go a little bit slower and bring up a little bit from here, a little bit from there, to kind of make things interesting. Sometimes the lectures are just rightly timed. This unit, I'm starting to sense that I could have probably added more sections, but we're already almost at the very end. So inshallah, we'll make it up by some more details. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.